Hey everyone, welcome to Broadband Deployment News. It's not just small ISPs that have an issue with the letter of credit that is in the BEAD program. There are 5 pretty good sized ISPs that have sent a letter to the NTIA outlining their issues with that. I'll be right back. We'll take a look at it. Hey there, Rick Uzzi with Broadband Deployment News. Thanks for joining me. So, we've heard a lot about the letter of credit and the issue that this is going to be, and we tend to think of that being smaller ISPs. How this will be an impact on those that maybe are new to the business, or maybe small, operating in a town, and they want to expand their area and provide service in areas that maybe has been too expensive for them, and they can't because of the letter of credit. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the issues with that as we look at this letter. But it's not just them, because again, this letter is 5 mid-sized ISPs that have come out and said that this is something that's going to be a burden for them as well. So I thought I'd take a look at this, and they make some really good points in here. So you see here, Brightspeed. This is on the Brightspeed website, and this is their press release, but it also includes the letter that was sent to the NTIA. So Brightspeed and 5 other mid-sized broadband providers say letter of credit requirements in current BEAD program will reduce broadband expansion investments. You see here, today, 6 of the country's largest regional ISPs covering 44 states wrote to Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo and Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications Alan Davidson, requesting alternatives to the current letter of credit requirement for participation in the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, or the BEAD program. The provider's letter highlights industry-wide concerns that current letter of credit requirements is overly burdensome and will reduce private investments to expand broadband, particularly in rural areas. So let's remember what the goal of this program is, the BEAD program, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. And the goal is to get broadband everywhere that is currently unserved or underserved as the first 2 goals, unserved being anybody that's less than 25 megabits per second by 3 megabits per second, and then underserved, anybody that's over that, but under 100 by 20. And that is the goal. And a lot of these are going to be rural areas. They're going to be areas where it's just been too expensive to deploy broadband. And the program includes approximately 45 billion, 42.45, is that right? Yeah. So $1 billion for broadband deployment, and that seems like a lot of money. And by the time all the matching funds are in there, it's going to be a lot more. But again, there's matching fund requirements for these service providers as well. So that's a burden on them. And plus, they've got this letter of credit. So it seems like a lot of money. It certainly seemed like more money a few years ago when this was first passed, because we did not have the huge amount of inflation that we have today, which has really taken hold. And that continues to this day. There's still inflation. There's still issues with how much it's going to cost these days to get broadband deployed compared to what it did 2 years ago. So it seems like a lot of money, but some states have come out and said, you know what, we're not going to be able to reach everybody in our state, or certainly not going to be able to reach everybody with fiber, which is the preferred technology. So every little bit matters. And if you add burdens on this, then that's just going to be that many more people that will not be covered by these funds. So that's very important. Additionally, here, let's see, where did I leave off? Here it is, I guess. Additionally, the broadband companies underscored the ways the current letter of credit requirement would hold them back from important BEAD deployment goals. Specifically, the companies say the letter of credit requirement will force them to divert funds from ongoing network deployment or not participate in the BEAD program at all. I was going to actually shift to the letter here because I think they're repeating some of the stuff that's in the letter. So you see the letter here. The undersigned are mid-sized broadband internet service providers who wish to participate in the BEAD program. We write today to ask NTIA to provide guidance on alternatives to the BEAD program's requirement that all applicants obtain an irrevocable letter of credit of 25% of the award in addition to the 25% company match requirement. So again, there's 25% that they're going to have to match. Now that match money is going to go toward deploying broadband. However, this 25% letter of credit does not go toward broadband. That just simply is basically collateral that sits in the bank pretty much the whole time while this build is going on. They can't make use of that money. So they've got to come up with their 25% match. Plus they've got to come up with that amount that then is just going to sit there as kind of a guarantee that they're going to fulfill their obligations. So that is a significant burden. Says here, like you, we are committed to deliver broadband to 100% of U.S. households, and we very much want to be a part of that solution, but we believe that the letter of credit requirement in its current state will force many ISPs out of the program. And with our companies, the requirement rate may reduce our ability to reach, at a minimum, 20% of the recipients we could deploy to absent the current framework. So 2 points there. One is this will prevent some companies from even participating. And, I heard today, it was a webinar I was watching today, US Telecom, and it was actually, I think it was the CEO of Brightspeed, I believe, was saying that they could, there might be areas where they would decide not to participate because of this letter of credit. And then the point here being that even if they do participate, that at a minimum means that 20% of maybe the homes that they would have reached, they won't be able to reach with this letter of credit in place. So if they could reach, let's say one of these providers could reach 10,000 homes without the letter of credit, then that's going to be more like 8,000 homes by the time they have to take that letter of credit into account. So that obviously, when you multiply that times all these providers, and you've got other providers that can't participate, that's a significant thing. And the NTIA would really like to have all kinds of providers participating in this. They really don't, even though it looks like they are favoring the larger providers by things like this. They really aren't. They don't want to do that. I think people sometimes feel like they really do. Like, oh, you want to give this to the large incumbents. They really don't want to do that. But when you have policies like this in place, that's what it looks like. And when you talk about other kinds of policies like the labor requirements and natural resources requirements, those kinds of things that are in there, it really does. It gets to be a burden, as far as all these kinds of regulations and these hoops that companies have to jump through. And the larger companies are kind of used to that stuff, but the smaller operators, are not used to that. And these mid-sized operators here are saying that even for them, the letter of credit is going to be an issue. It says here, small, rural, municipal, and tribal ISPs have been vocal about the burden this requirement will create for their companies, organizations, and governments. We may be larger companies, but we will face similar burdens. These financial demands will reduce broadband investment by our companies because we will either have to divert funds from ongoing network deployment or not participate in the BEAD program at all. So again, they might decide not to participate. We understand and are sympathetic to the goals of ensuring that an ISP is both financially able to build the promised networks and that the government can help recoup its investments in the event of a default. However, the NTIA's requirements go far beyond any other federal or state broadband funding program. And you might be thinking, well, what about RDOF? Because that's where this letter of credit came from and was modeled on. And they have a really good comeback on that, which we'll see here in a minute. Under the current BEAD requirements, award recipients will be required to commit before the first strand of fiber is placed capital amounts that exceed 100% of the project cost. And I think what they're saying there is they've got to be able to cover the full cost of the project plus the 25% that's just going to sit there unused. Moreover, the rule requires ISPs to obtain the letter of credit at the outset of a project, even though the government does not have to distribute the funds if the provider fails to complete the build. Therefore, requiring ISPs to submit a letter of credit at the outset of a grant does not actually protect taxpayer dollars. That's a really good point. So they've got to get this letter of credit in place before they can ever qualify for the funds, and they won't get the funds until they're into the build of the project. According to Commerce and NTIA staff, letter of credit requirements were modeled after the FCC's RDOF program, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. The RDOF and BEAD programs, however, differ in significant ways that should guide NTIA's approach. The RDOF program released funds to ISPs upfront, as opposed to the BEAD program, where the provider is responsible for the upfront costs. RDOF did not require matching contributions from providers. Also, RDOF, a much smaller program than BEAD, required letters of credit for 10% of the award for just 1 year of funding, not 25% for the entirety of the build. That's an important thing as well. So it's a smaller amount, and it was just for the 1 year at a time, as opposed to 25% here. We believe that there are alternatives to the BEAD letter of credit requirement that will both show financial capability and protect taxpayers in the event of an ISP defaults, while at the same time allowing the BEAD program to achieve its goals. We suggest that NTIA encourage broader participation by financially capable ISPs of all sizes by modifying the letter of credit requirements as follows. And they suggest reducing the letter of credit requirement to 5% of the total grant amount, requiring ISPs to obtain the letter of credit when grant funds are received, not during the application process and the initial construction phase. This will ensure taxpayer dollars are protected. So they can wait to get this letter of credit before any money's been dispersed. That letter of credit isn't doing anything, but yet the ISP has to have that money sitting aside. So let them use that money to get started on the project. Retire the letter of credit upon certification of grant compliance. In addition, many stakeholders have suggested using surety bonds, certification of good standing, or parent guarantees to protect the government's interest, and NTIA should allow these to be used as alternatives to a letter of credit. So surety bonds, performance bonds, those kinds of things are much less onerous. It costs much less. You don't have to set aside a whole lot of capital to get those things. You just basically got to pay kind of a fee to have those bonds. Whereas a letter of credit, you've got to, again, set aside all that money. Plus, you've then got to pay, I think it's a 2% to 5% on that money every year that you have to pay as a fee. So it's not just that amount that you've got sitting there, but then you got to pay, again, 2% to 5% of that amount yearly. So again, you see here who the signatories here who signed this. You've got Bob Mudge, CEO of Brightspeed, Bob Udell, President and CEO of Consolidated Communications, Josh Duckworth, CFO of Alta Fiber, Mike Olson, General Counsel and Chief Corporate Responsibility Officer at Altice, Tony Thomas, President and CEO of Windstream, and Harold Zeitz, CEO of Ziply Fiber. So these are some good-sized operators that are very active in deploying broadband. Windstream, for example, they've been really active. They've really done a great job in going into areas and doing public-private partnerships. For example, I've done several of those here in Georgia, where I am, because Windstream is an incumbent provider in various places. So they've gone to the state and to counties, and they have partnered with those folks to help them get broadband to these areas. So that's a way that they have been able to participate in getting broadband to these unserved areas, is with these public and private partnerships. But they also obviously would love to be able to participate in BEAD where they can, to get some funds to help deploy broadband in those areas, maybe where they don't have a partner. So again, these are large, what I would call large ISPs in my mind. I think of small ISPs as the guys that are covering a town or a portion of a state, maybe most of a state. But I mean, these guys cover, again, between all of them, they cover 44 states. So these are multi-state operators that are making their case here, and they are making their case for themselves, but also, as you see here, as they talk about it, for the smaller providers, that everybody should have an option here to be able to do something that will allow them to deploy broadband for less cost, less of this money that has to be sitting aside and wasted. And if this is done, again, we'll be getting that much further to the goal of BEAD, which is to get broadband access everywhere. And if you're locking up 20% or more of the funds, when I say 20% or more, it's a 25%. It's actually 25% that the letter of credit is, but they're saying that could prevent them from hitting 20% of locations. So you're immediately reducing the amount of locations that are going to be able to be supported with BEAD by having this in place. So I think they make a good argument here. And they're not the only ones that have made the argument. I talked about this a couple of months ago. We had a letter that was sent by Connect Humanity that had lots of signatures on it. This was sent to the NTIA back in September 6th. Again, Connect Humanity was kind of driving this process, but they brought up some similar points. And then lots of folks signed on to this. It wasn't just internet service providers. It was lots of stakeholders. You see Connect Humanity leading the way, but you got American Association for Public Broadband, Internet Society. You had some states and counties and cities, Kansas Department of Commerce, Washington State Broadband Office, Vermont Community Broadband, Public Knowledge, Consumer Reports. So there's just an advocate for consumers right there. Texas Rural Funders, Vermont Communications. So lots of people, Free Press, not surprising there, CCG Consulting. Doug Dawson, you'll see lots of blog posts from him about broadband. So he was on board. Next Century Cities, they've been advocating for a long time for municipal networks, municipal broadband. There's Scott Woods from Ready.net. He was my guest a couple of days ago when we talked about broadband funding and getting grants for BEAD. So Scott signed on to that. He's president of public-private partnerships for Ready.net. And prior to that, he was an NTIA senior official in several different areas with broadband. So he knows it from both ends there. So again, you got Measurement Lab, they do the speed testing right there. Who else we got? Rhode Island State Senator, Belzoni Cable. So you've got some operators in here. Again, you had cities and states, city of Anacortes, Lake Plata County, all kinds of folks signing onto this. So I went ahead and I linked to this letter. I linked to this letter if you want to check that out from back in September. I also linked to the Notice of Funding Opportunity if you want to check that out. And I referenced the page numbers that you can read about the letter of credit requirements that are in the NOFO, the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity, so you can see actually what's required there. So the NTIA has come out and said that they're considering these things, they're looking at it, and hopefully they will provide future guidance and maybe some alternatives for this. There have been really good arguments made. I don't think you can argue with that there haven't been good arguments. So the NTIA, again, needs to take a step back, look at the goal of the program, and then look at the arguments that are being made as to how the goal of the program is being impacted by this letter of credit. Everybody who's argued that the letter of credit needs to be adjusted and other alternatives have said, we understand why there's a letter of credit, because nobody wants some company that's going to get a lot of money to start a build, get a lot of money, and then go bankrupt, and then suddenly that money's lost and the taxpayers have lost. And that area has lost because they now do not have broadband. So there are options that can help protect taxpayer dollars, and there are options here as we see in this Brightspeed letter and these others that have wrote to the NTIA today that can take that letter of credit and maybe apply it differently, less money at a different time, not because again this is very different from RDOF, as they said. In RDOF the money was received. You had to do a letter of credit, but the money was received right away, and it wasn't for the full build period. And here it's the full build period. It's 25% upfront before you ever get started. So lots of good points. So the NTIA needs to look at that and realize that if they don't make changes, it really is going to impact the number of service providers that want to or can participate in this. And then if they do decide to participate, it's going to impact by, again, as here, at least 20% of the locations that we could serve through BEAD will not be served because of this letter of credit. So hopefully they'll take a look at that. Thanks for joining me today. If this was interesting, helpful, if you give me a thumbs up on the video, I'd appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, click the subscribe button, click the bell to be notified when I'm live. Thanks again, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.